Hey friends, ever wondered what PC specs you need for 3D Studio Max? Well, today we're breaking it down so you can choose the very best components for your rendering needs. And by the end, you're going to be a pro at picking the perfect specs for both 3D Studio Max and your chosen rendering engine. Why trust our advice? Well, we're a top-tier system builder crafting award-winning computers for over 20 years. We've been voted the UK's best system builder 5 times, and now we're sharing our expert insights with you for free. So whether you're designing your dream gaming rig or a powerhouse workstation, we've got you covered. Today's topic, the ideal workstation specs for 3D Studio Max, is straight from the advice we would give our high-end clients. Love tech? Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, all for more insights. Drop your questions in the comments below, and thanks for supporting our wee channel. It helps us bring you the very best in content. So ready to dive in? Let's get started. So before we really dive in, what do we need to know? When building a workstation for 3D Studio Max, it's a little bit more complicated than other creative applications. Why is that? Because 3D Studio Max has 2 sets of individual hardware requirements. First up, you've got the specs for 3ds Max itself, which are similar to what you would need for other creative applications like Adobe's Creative Suite, which is great, right? See, the thing is, here's the kicker. You also need to think about rendering. 3ds Max supports various rendering solutions like its integrated render Arnold, as well as third-party solutions such as VRAM, Manta Ray and others, which all have their own individual requirements. So in this video, we're going to guide you through the key component choices, focusing on making 3D Studio Max workflow silky smooth, but we're also going to touch on the rendering options. But our main focus today is going to be optimizing 3D Studio Max pre-render. Ready to dive in? Let's get started. So what CPU is the best for 3D Studio Max? The best CPU for 3D Studio Max in 2024 is currently the Intel Core i9-14900KS. Why? Because it boasts a crazy impressive single core frequency, topping out at almost 6 GHz. 3ds Max loves CPUs with single high core frequencies over those with multiple cores that run at lower speeds. However, there are 2 scenarios where you might opt for a different processor. The first is if you're on a budget, of course. The second is if you plan to use a CPU renderer and need those CPUs with many cores, something like AMD Ryzen Threadripper 7985WX. It's got 64 cores and a 5.1 GHz boost, which is a nice compromise. Another thing to consider is how many PCI Express lanes you're going to need. If you plan on using a GPU renderer like Octane, considering multiple GPUs is going to be the way. In that case, CPUs like the aforementioned AMD Threadripper are going to be a great choice. They offer a good balance and compromise a little bit on that single-threaded performance, but open a gateway to those multiple GPUs. So what about Xeon CPUs for 3D Studio Max? Well, in 2024, Xeon CPUs just aren't our top pick for 3ds Max workstations. Why? Well, as we learned earlier, 3ds Max benefits from that fast single core performance, which just isn't Xeon's strong suit. For those needing lots of cores, AMD Threadrippers are a better option. Xeons are great for specialized systems, which require 2 or more CPUs, ECC memory support, large cache, enterprise level reliability, but they're just not great for 3D Studio Max workstations. So does 3D Studio Max work better on an Intel or an AMD CPU? Well, to be truthful, it works well on both Intel and AMD CPUs. If you're going to be going for top-end performance, then go with Intel, but if you're on a budget, then AMD's Ryzen 7000 series CPUs do hit the sweet spot for performance and price. Now, how about those dual CPU systems for 3D Studio Max? Well, it's worth touching on, but dual CPU systems have their place, but we're seeing them more and more move to the likes of AI and deep learning. For 3D Studio Max, all the features you will get in this system with a dual CPU system, well, they're going to be wasted, and in fact, in reality, they're probably going to deliver less performance than a CPU with classic, super fast single core frequencies. What GPU is best for 3ds Max? This is a great question, and like many things in life, it isn't as easy as it first seems. For 3ds Max in application workflow, you should look at a single GPU from NVIDIA, either from the professional range, which is fully supported by 3ds Max, or you can use one of NVIDIA's gaming cards from their GeForce range. These cards aren't fully supported, but they are cheaper and they're a great choice for tasks like game development or GPU-based rendering. You'll note that I've not mentioned AMD cards here, but they do work in 3ds Max. Most renderers, how would I say it, they require NVIDIA's CUDA cores to work. Combine that with the long-term positive experience that we have at Utopia with NVIDIA cards means that we don't recommend AMD for 3ds Max, we recommend NVIDIA as our brand of choice. Now, what's the difference between NVIDIA's professional RTX cards and those gaming RTX cards that I just mentioned? Now, NVIDIA's professional cards, formerly known as Quadro, are certified by Autodesk, the maker of 3ds. This certification means that when you're using a professional card, it guarantees compatibility and stability inside the application. This sounds like everyone using 3ds should just go out and buy a professional card, but it's not that simple. Professional cards are substantially more expensive due to their higher quality of both the hardware and the software. That ensures their superior performance, yes, but if you're looking for best value, then the reality is NVIDIA's GeForce RTX gaming cards are a great choice. They often provide excellent performance at a lower cost and have that added benefit of allowing you to test your game on the hardware that will match your end user's systems. In summary, while NVIDIA's professional RTX cards do offer guaranteed stability and support from Autodesk, GeForce RTX cards can be a more cost-effective solution with completely solid performance results in 3ds, especially for you game developers. Now, is there any use for multiple video cards inside 3ds Max? Well, 3ds itself doesn't benefit from having multiple GPUs, but third-party rendering engines like Octane and Redshift can take full advantage of them. These engines scale efficiently and effectively with multiple cards, making it a worthwhile consideration if you plan to use such tools. Typically, this approach makes sense if you've already budgeted for at least one RTX 4080 Super or above in your workstation. If you plan to start with one card and expand later, then please ensure your motherboard and your CPU supports enough PCI Express lanes. You're also going to need a power supply that can handle those heavy power requirements from the GPUs, and a case that can fit all those cards, as well as a proper cooling solution. So keep all those things in mind. Now, how much VRAM, that's video card memory, does 3ds need? Well, there are three answers to this question, depending on exactly what you're looking at. First up, 3ds viewport performance. Second is if you're using a CPU renderer, and the third is if you're going to be using a GPU renderer. So let's get this answered. So for 3ds viewport performance, in general use within 3ds, including tasks like creating, editing and animating models, VRAM plays a significant role ensuring smooth performance. Here's a breakdown of VRAM requirements for 3ds itself. For basic usage, think of simple modeling and less intensive tasks like think of a GPU with at least 46 gigabytes of VRAM is going to be sufficient, and this is going to handle most viewport activities without any significant lag. For intermediate usage, we're going to think of maybe more complex scenes, higher polygon counts, multiple textures. We're going to go up to 8 gigabytes of VRAM, and this is a good balance for most users and is going to provide a nice smooth viewport experience. For advanced users, we're talking about very detailed models, high resolution textures and intensive editing tasks. For here, we're going to be going 12 gigabytes or more of VRAM. This is going to help maintain high FPS in that viewport, making it easier to work on complex scenes. In general, 3ds benefits from higher VRAM as it allows smoother manipulation of models and scenes, reducing lag and improving overall workflow efficiency. Now, CPU rendering. For CPU-based rendering, we're going to look at engines like V-Ray, Corona, Cinema 4D. Physical renderer, the CPU cores handle the workload. This means VRAM really isn't a major factor. You're going to focus your budget on a CPU with many cores to achieve the best rendering performance and ensure that you have a decent amount of system RAM to go with that CPU. Now, for GPU-based rendering, we're looking at engines like Redshift, Octane, V-Ray. VRAM is crucial. Your GPU's processing capabilities and its VRAM capacity determine the performance you will see. So here's a little rundown of what you need to consider. For simple scenes, we're looking at low poly count models, low resolution textures. A GPU with 6 to 8 gigabytes of VRAM is going to be enough. Something like an NVIDIA RTX 4060 would do here. For moderately complex scenes, we're thinking of projects, we're moving into higher resolution textures, more polygons. We're going to aim for a GPU with 10 to 16 gigabytes of VRAM. Options like NVIDIA's RTX 4080 would be good here. And then moving into highly complex scenes, very detailed projects, high resolution textures, complex lighting, we're going to be looking at 24 gigabytes or more of VRAM. Something like NVIDIA's RTX 4090 or professional grade cards like the RTX A6000 with its 48 gigabytes of VRAM are ideal. I think now is time for a top tip. Out of core rendering. Some engines like Redshift and Octane render use system RAM if the VRAM is exceeded. While this can be a useful feature, it comes at the cost of performance and can cause crashes in some scenes. Investing in a GPU with sufficient amount of VRAM is generally better as it avoids project delays. Now in summary, choosing the right amount of VRAM depends on your project complexity and of course your budget, but prioritise higher VRAM for more demanding tasks to ensure smooth butter-like performance and efficient rendering. So how much RAM does 3ds need? The amount of RAM you need in 3ds depends on the complexity of your projects. For both CPU and GPU rendering, the RAM choices are kind of similar based on the project complexity. We've made a little streamlined guide. 3ds viewport performance. For basic usage, you're talking about modelling less intensive tasks, 16 gigabytes of RAM is going to be sufficient. Moving on to more complex scenes with higher polygon counts and multiple textures, 32 gigabytes of RAM is what we recommend. And for advanced usage, we're talking about highly detailed models, high resolution textures and pretty intensive editing tasks. 64 gigabytes of RAM is more ideal. Now moving on to rendering, whether we're using CPU or GPU rendering, more complex scenes and higher resolution projects are going to benefit from additional RAM. Here's what you need to know. At the basics, 32 gigabytes of RAM in this area is going to be enough. But as we move into intermediate rendering, for more complex projects, we would recommend 64 gigabytes of RAM to ensure smooth performance. Now for advanced rendering projects, large-scale projects, 128 gigabytes of RAM can help you manage large data sets more efficiently. Now keep in mind to also consider multitasking. If you run other memory-intensive tasks alongside 3ds, then consider adding more RAM, e.g. 64 gigabytes or 128 gigabytes to ensure smooth multitasking. And also think of the future. Investing in more RAM now, more than what is currently needed, can help future-proof your system against increasingly complex projects and newer software updates. Now moving on, what type of storage drive should you use for 3D Studio? Well, you want to think of a solid-state drive of some sort. In 2024, using a mechanical disk in any sort is just a one-way street to extreme frustration. While faster NVMe SSDs won't provide all that much of a performance boost, some are available for a little bit more than a normal traditional SSD. So they are worth that additional cost. For capacities, 1 terabyte is enough for most users, but at Utopia we're seeing 2 and 4 terabyte drives becoming more popular as prices continue to fall. Now what storage configuration should you consider for best use in 3D Studio? Well, for everyday use, a single drive is going to be just fine, but if you want a pro level setup, then it could be worth thinking about having 2 or more drives. Your first drive is going to be for Windows, for 3D Studio, and for any other applications you use, like Adobe's Creative Suite. If your budget allows, you want to get an M.2 NVMe, ideally 1 to 4 terabytes in size. For your second drive, you want another SSD for your projects. Again, SSD or NVMe will ensure a super slick workflow. The size is going to depend on your project files, but we tend to see clients choose again between 2 and 4 terabytes here. Now finally, if your budget allows, a third drive for long-term storage of completed projects is a good option. You won't work from this drive directly, so technically it can be a hard drive. It's worth saying, whenever we're talking about data, we always mention to ourselves about the importance of backups. Having multiple copies of your projects is incredibly important. This can take the form of multiple hard drives configured in RAID, a local network attached storage device, or even cloud storage. And for the most prepared of users, it could technically be all 3. Now, what if you're on a budget and you can't afford the best system? Well, like many things in life, sometimes the best is simply what you can afford or already have. The great thing about 3D Studio is that, well, the specs I've given you here today show how to get the ultimate performance gains from this incredible application. If your budget doesn't stretch to the specs that we've listed, then work to best principles. Get the fastest CPU with single core frequency, the most RAM, and the best storage you can afford. Buying a PC or building one yourself that you can upgrade might also help should your project demands get bigger in the future. So to conclude, when you're building the ultimate 3D Studio Max workstation, look for a CPU that delivers the best single-threaded performance. The higher the frequency, the better. Aim for a CPU that can hit 4 GHz or more. You do want a dedicated GPU, something with 16 GB or more VRAM, and for RAM, well, 32 GB, as we said, is good, but for professional use you might see workstations with 64 or even 128 GB if you're working on huge projects or you're performing extreme multitasking. For storage, 1 TB or larger SSDs or NVMe storage for the operating system and software, a secondary drive for all your project files, and a third drive for long-term storage of projects and assets that have been completed. Now, looking for what makes a great Photoshop workstation? In the video linked above, I share the go-to specs to bring out the best in that application. I really hope you found this video useful. If you've got any questions, please ask them in the comment section below. Stay curious, stay different, hit the sub button, and we're going to see you on the next one.